Day 134 to 11:24 a.m. Cliff House Meeting Room, Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon Province, Philippines. Mark watched the strange-eyed girl in front of him as she munched on the bar of chocolate that she held in her hands. Luckily, it looked like Fourth managed to calm down because of the chocolate. Well, even an ancient dragon was not able to resist such temptation and sweetness. Seriously. You're an amusing person. Fourth turned to Mark as she took another bite. You might be the only person who would think of offering chocolates to existences like us. Fourth was correct in that sense. Like Mark had said before, the eyes were akin to apostles of a god. The observer might not be the god that created Earth and its universe. However, that position was only a step lower than God itself. And following that, the eyes that were under the command of the observer. People who would know of this fact would likely offer the most formal and luxurious kinds of food to them. It would even become treated as some kind of religious offering. Mark, however, unceremoniously gave her chocolates. The chocolates were even packed inside the wrappers. And that was the most amusing part here for her. That was why she did not hate this fact. If it's third, she might have flipped the table already and start yelling. Fourth mumbled. What are you talking about? Mark asked with a frown. Fourth had been on deep thought on her own and was mumbling things that were hard to understand. Of course, Mark could not make out most of what she said because she was continuously munching on her chocolate. Fourth realized that she was mumbling things and turned to Mark. Nothing, it's not your problem. She took another bite. Yeah, it's not your problem. Mark started to have a headache at this point. The eyes were really hard existences to deal with. Furthermore, even though she also had emotional fluctuations, it was obscured for the most part. He could not tell what she was thinking at all. Then, do you have any other business here? Hearing that question made Fourth sulk once more. No, I don't, she exclaimed, getting another frustrated bite on her chocolate. Our job is to deliver the news of the second wave to every Earth-born existence that passed the criteria. You're the first one I saw here in my area, but Ninth already robbed me of my work. Mark finally understood why Fourth was sulking this much. The eyes were born to follow the commands of the observer. Now, their duty was to deliver the news of Earth's impending future to existences that passed the criteria that were given to them. Mark did not know what the criteria were, but it looked like that he and May were the only ones currently present in Southeast Asia. Say, what are these criteria you are talking about? Mark could not help but ask, and this question took Fourth's attention. She stared at him like she was thinking about the circumstances. Well, I guess we're not really told to not say it, huh? Fourth murmured. Then, let me tell you. And there, Fourth stated the three most important criteria. First were existences that were born on Earth. Humans, animals, insects, even ghosts, elementals, spirits, and demons were included. As long as they passed the second and third criteria, they would be eligible. Second, they needed to have cut off or, if not, at least, an obscure string of fate. Meaning, existences that could and possibly defy fate and destiny. People that were like Mark that already went past their death dates and managed to continue living on Earth. Even deities of the past were also included in this scope. There might be very few gods that were born on Earth, but there was no lack of deities. Lastly, they must have at least one follower. Of course, the more, the better. It should be someone that believed in them in their entirety. If better, people that worshipped them. Mark did not pay much attention to the first criteria. He already heard it from Ninth. However, something entered his mind after hearing the second criterion. It was also mentioned in passing by Ninth when Mark asked why he was told about it. But why were people that could defy fate needed? Tell me. Is Earth fated to collapse in the second wave? Mark asked in all seriousness, and that question made Fourth freeze on her next bite of chocolate. How amusing. Did you deduce that information just from the criteria? It seems that you're a person who think too much about things. But I'm right, aren't I? Mark questioned once more. Yup. You're right. Though not entirely. Fourth took the bite she froze in. Earth is fated to collapse, but not in the second wave. It's just the start. Fourth added, but if no preventive measures are made, Earth would really go into ruin when the second wave came. The childish fourth already turned serious. The fates of Earth, its dimensions, all the creatures and even the things inside it. All of them are stored in a single compendium following a single route while branching off from it. It is one of the countless collections of fates of many things that existed in this universe. Further than that, each collection is compiled with countless libraries of different universes in existence. Are you talking about the Akashic records? Mark could not help but ask about it. Oh, you know about it? That's one of the countless names it had. Fourth replied, looking amused. Then, explaining will become easier. One or two fates that were changed. Or even if a few million were affected by the observer while maintaining the balance of the world, it would still be all right. Since the past, the present, and the future was already written, the creatures affected by their destiny could only make minute changes to it. The observers and their apostles, the eyes, were the only ones exempted in making changes on a large scale since it was their duty to maintain the balance or preventing a large-scale annihilation. Still, at times, even the records would branch, allowing the individual to choose which road to thread on. It's called the turning point, Fourth said. Sometimes, it comes with a stroke of luck or based on the individual's actions. One example was a person finding a bag filled with cash. It was a turning point between the person that found the bag and the actual owner of the bag, and the turning point rested on the hands of the person that found it. If the person returned the bag, the fate of the owner would continue as usual. However, if not, it might turn into the worst situation. It would be depending on the circumstances that the owner of the bag was in. On the other hand, the person that found the bag would have his life changed if he decided to run away and keep the bag for himself. Turning points like those were quite common in the gazillions of fates stored in the records. Still, the whole world and all the records inside it were coming to a turning point at the same time was not supposed to happen. It was the apocalypse. Are you saying that this is not supposed to happen? Mark asked. Of course not, Fourth exclaimed. At least, not now. The actual apocalypse that is recorded in the records is supposed to happen in the next 100 years. An intergalactic chase between space creatures would occur near the asteroid belt of this solar system. The explosions would impact the formation of the asteroids, sending some of them to the trajectory of Earth's orbit. It will cause half of the surface of the Earth to be enveloped in flames, allowing only a minuscule population to survive. And further than that, more of them will suffer from the aftermath. Then, a new civilization will rise, and it's the start of the new Earth in another several thousands of years. Mark was speechless as to how this girl just divulged a catastrophic event in the future like it would be something amusing to witness. Are you sure that you should be telling me that? It's fine. That fate doesn't matter anymore, Fourth replied, munching on her chocolate. The current Earth is going on a different turning point now, anyway. I guess. It's fine to tell you, but the current events on Earth are not written in the records at all. I guess, you can deduce what happened from all of what I said. Another observer messed up, like the predecessor of the current one on Earth? Mark replied. Bingo. Fourth gave Mark a thumbs up. Our master, the current observer of Earth, is a very organized individual. She kept the Earth in check since she took over. However, it did not mean that all observers are like her. There are also some dumb ones or ones that made idiotic decisions. Munch. An idiotic observer of an inhabitable planet in another galaxy several thousand years ago. The Earth is still young compared to that planet, so while Earth barely had potential people at that time, and when gods from other worlds were busy creating their own races here on Earth, that planet was already experiencing overpopulation. Munch. Since the scientific development of that planet was slower than the expanding population, its observer took drastic measures. He made a scientist his medium and, accidentally, spread out the microorganism from the scientist's laboratory. But then, it came out of control. Munch. As I said, the scientific development was slow, and that observer forgot to add that fact to his calculations. The people were not able to find a cure, and the microorganism mutated into neither a bacteria nor a virus. Munch. And that virus caused the planet's ruin, and the observer was stripped of his title. What happened to that planet now? Mark asked, fully immersed in the story. The planet and its entire galaxy are gone now, Forth shrugged. All that is left is a gigantic rift in space that even existences like us will not want to approach. But before that galaxy collapsed on its own, it spread catalysts of the microorganisms all across the universe. And now, it reached us, right? Mark added. Right, Forth nodded. Many factions, organizations, and even gods are helping with eradicating this to no avail. Every now and then, another planet will still collapse because of the microorganism. Hearing that, the memories of Freed resurfaced in Mark's mind. The collapse of Arielis was also caused by the same disaster as it seemed. And somehow, Mark felt happy and frustrated. One of Freed's wishes had been fulfilled in an unexpected way. To know the source of all this mess that cost Freed his family, friends, and home. And the fact that Mark had no way of getting revenge for Freed's sake as the culprit was an observer in the first place felt frustrating. The room fell silent as Mark was deep in thought, but then... Wah! Forth cried out. Mark snapped back to reality and turned to Forth only to scratch his head. Forth was staring at the last empty wrapper of chocolate in her hand. She nibbled and munched on the chocolates absent-mindedly and did not realize that she ate all of it. That was more than a dozen bars. Seeing her sulking face as she stared at the wrapper with her 3 odd-looking eyes, Mark sighed. With a wave of his hand, he took another dozen. When she saw the chocolates on the table that Mark took out, her face brightened. But then, UWAH, Forth exclaimed as she held her head and looked up. Before Mark could ask what was going on, Forth grabbed all the chocolates on the table, hugging everything with her small body. She then stood up and looked at Mark. Hee. It looks like I said too much. I'm being called back immediately. See y'all later. And then, she vanished. Seeing that, Mark sighed. That girl was amusing on her own. In any case, she gave valuable information, though it was still incomplete. Mark still felt on edge with an eye sitting in front of him. However, if it was that girl, he would not mind as she was not hard to get along with, unlike that 9th. Day 137 to 12:22 p.m. Cliff House, Mountain Base, General Nakar, Quezon Province, Philippines. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. After the sudden appearance of Forth in the base, Mark became more concrete on his plans. There was still no confirmation of anything that would start the second wave of the apocalypse. However, remembering Forth's reaction towards Mark's deductions about the fusion of Earth's dimensions, it looked like that he was not far off. Forth did not show any disagreement either. And thus, in these 3 days, the preparation of the base started. First, dealing with the black dust around the base. The majority of this task was given to the farmers. They had nothing to do at the moment because of the same issue, after all. When the fusion of dimensions came, there might be a possibility of the dust dispersing or getting buried. The chances of it getting layered over the soil were the same too. In both cases, it was better to remove as much black dust right now as they could, as it would still affect the nutrients in the soil. In the former case, it would be even harder to remove. Mark properly briefed them of the slow effects of getting in contact with the dust and were now wearing the protective armor that Mark made for gathering the black dust. Currently, Mark had no specific purpose for gathering the black dust. However, considering its effects on living creatures, it might have some use in the future. Mark also intended to experiment on this. Maybe, he might be able to use this black dust to slowly weaken enemy bases. Who knows? It could slowly drain and absorb nutrients out of the bodies of living things by touch. What would happen if it was ingested in large amounts? There were a lot of possibilities to try out. The next thing that Mark focused on was the terrain around the Evered Spirit Tree in the spirit dimension. For the first time, he sent people on the other side. Many people in his base actually volunteered for the job. However, as they could not leave the other work unattended, only a picked few were selected. Of course, They were picked based on their physical capabilities as they needed to work on flattening the land as fast as possible. As for the dried remains of the trees there, Aphelia used the infected under her control. It made things a whole lot easier. Furthermore, the infected also served as a fighting force since the other side was not safe at all. In fact, ever since the work team was dispatched there, they had experienced infected attacks every now and then. It was even more dangerous since a lot of the infected in the spirit dimension were capable of using magic. Speaking of the spirit dimension, Paphile's group went ahead and left back to the stone fortress of the White Duendes. It was Felinia's suggestion as she wanted to relay the information to her father, the king of the Eastern Mountain. The news alone would not worry her too much if it came from other people. However, Mark had no reason to deceive them, and an actual eye appeared to further back up what he said. Thus, Felinia urged Teremilio and their whole group to return as soon as possible. However, they were only able to return the next day since Spera had used up the times she was able to open portals that day after she gathered everyone for the meeting and transport the supplies they had in the pagoda back to the base a few times. Besides, though it might not look like it, Spera needed to spend more of her available energy to open a portal across Earth and the spirit dimension. And from what Mark told Edsel, after the plans in the base stabilized, the rest of Mark's group would go back to the spirit dimension to fulfill his promise. After all, they needed to find the mothers of Edsel and Teremilio. That was among their goals for entering the spirit dimension. However, the plans got cut off in the middle because of the appearance of Ouroboros. Now that Mark was back, they could continue the journey with him. It was not like they could not go on their own. However, without Mark's miasma, dealing with magical infected was extremely dangerous for them. Although it was possible that they could reach their destinations without Mark, the cost of the travel was too enormous for them. It was not just food or equipment, after all. It could be someone's life. And lastly, the events in the pagoda. As Mark had thought, a number of the survivors left the base after the incident. It was no surprise that the woman called Nanette urged most of the group to depart. That woman, from the observation of Odalina and the others, had an excellent way of her words. It was in a worse meaning, though. She had the knack for manipulating people around her. And as Mark did not hide his red eyes back then, it was to force that kind of trash away from his turf. In fact, Mark also planted some fear in her subconscious, causing her to make that decision. Unexpectedly, Nanette's best friend, the woman called Vera, was left behind with 5 other people. The hateful fact about that group, they dumped the youngest and the oldest in the hands of Mark's people. It was the middle-aged couple and the pair of a girl and a boy. The girl was 13 while the boy was 14. In the middle of a dangerous apocalypse, these ages were definitely young. As for the middle-aged couple, the man got injured while they were on the way to the pagoda. There was no way that they would be able to make it longer if they left the place. Unfortunately for that group, it was what Mark wanted. Those that left might be useful in terms of manpower. However, personality-wise, they did not pass. Besides, if Mark let too many people from different countries into his base, it would not be long for factions of those people to rise. It could create a rift between people in his base, and that was not a good thing at all. And as for that man that was injured, that injury was nothing for Mark's group. They still had some stock of regeneration medicine, and could likely commission more from the Infanta settlement in exchange for many things. This way, the couple would join his group wholeheartedly. They would be grateful and would work willingly because of this life debt. It was not wrong since an injured person would likely not make it long and die in this situation of the earth. Still, it was quite odd that Vera remained. She was like a dog that was being pushed around by Nanette without her knowing. After all, Vera thought that Nanette was her best friend all this time. And when Mark voiced the question, it was Colleen's fault once more. She called Vera onto the upper floors of the pagoda and showed the footages of Nanette doing her usual things, manipulating people. It ended up into an argument with Vera and Nanette on the same night, with the more timid Vera on the losing side. It was even more because most of their group were on Nanette's side. In that argument, Colleen and the other members that were in the pagoda purposely did not intervene. They were all watching using the cameras they installed at that time, securing that Vera would be left by the group. It was because, in everyone's view here, Vera was too good for that group. In the end, she was abandoned together with the other four. Colleen's plan was a success, although she broke someone's heart. Now, the childish Colleen was in charge of Vera and the other four. And seeing their reactions after they were brought to the base, it would not be long till they get used to the new environment. For now, they were grouped with Roan as they were all from the same country. It was easier to get used to people that way. The situation of the survivors aside, the collection of supplies in Reading City was going fine. It was not smooth since danger lurked in every corner. Still, as things would escalate as the second wave and the fusion of dimensions arrive, it would be better if they collected as much as they could. After all, if what Mark deduced really was correct, a lot of places on Earth would be buried. Most places on Earth, cities, towns, roads, and a whole lot more, were built over flattened land. Since the spirit dimension was more or less the version of Earth untouched by mankind, the land would likely reclaim its former places, burying everything underneath it. And it would bury everything, including uncollected supplies. Furthermore, even without the second wave, just the magical infected alone appearing on the surface of the Earth would make the collection of supplies far more dangerous than its current state. It would be possible to say that a cup of ramen could cost someone's life at that point in time. Roan and the others also formed a group and went back to Pennsylvania. Of course, they were not going to leave, but they volunteered to group up as one of the collection groups there. Of course, in Roan's family, it was only him that joined the group. His parents and sisters stayed in the base since, aside from Felicia, the three were non-combatants. Felicia, on the other hand, stayed to take care of Morgan, who was still unconscious. Nevertheless, after arriving here, it looked like Morgan started to recover faster. Of course, Feng Jiruo also stayed behind. In fact, she barely went out of her dwellings at all. Around her room, a strange energy fluctuation was always present, as they said. There was no need to ask what she was doing, and it seemed like she found the base suitable for her cultivation. Leaving movements of Mark's group around the pagoda, there were also movements on the camp of Ouroboros. According to Huey, it seemed that there was someone always watching the collection groups. He could detect it using the almost non-existent noises that the enemies made. The pagoda was in constant watch too. Although it seemed that for some reason, they stopped trying to infiltrate. The skirmishes also ceased from happening. It was as if the Ouroboros had given up all of a sudden and only decided to watch. And to Mark, it was a good piece of news. He would not be able to concentrate on more important things if Ouroboros kept on pestering them. He could wage war against them any other time, but not now. Absolutely not now. If they were just watching, just let them watch. If they made a hostile move, kill them. It was that simple. And now, the third day after his return, Mark could see that the things they needed in the base were planned out. It was time to start the preparation to return to the spirit dimension. But of course, the preparation that Mark was talking about was not food, clothes, or equipment. In his journey through New Jersey, he realized his weaknesses. Without relying on his psychic abilities and demon blood, he was weak in terms of speed. He could not catch up with those that had naturally fast movements, like those bone-armored brothers and the Jersey Devil. And now, it was time to upgrade himself. Even May was added to the account. After all, Mark collected some awesome abilities that would suit him and May and would address their weaknesses. Mark readied the crystals and handed one to May. Like the usual, May would go first as he assisted her. After all, it would be a painful experience. Day 137 to 8:42 p.m. Bedroom, Cliff House, Moton Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon Province, Philippines. Ready? Mark asked May, who was currently lying down on the bed. He was currently holding onto the crystal that he got from the female leaders of the outlaws in Browning Square. Rainbow Dragascale, Mutation. It was what Mark called it. The name came from the dragon-like aura of the rainbow-colored scales. Mark considered calling it something like a rainbow dragon, but as the mutation was incomplete, unlike the ones he got from the father and son duo of Death Valley Settlement, he decided on the current name. And to Mark's question, "I'm ready," May nodded with eyes filled with resolution. And thus, Mark made May swallow the crystal, and it turned pieces that entered her throat. Almost immediately after the crystal entered her body, May lost consciousness. Just like the first time, May's body temperature rose sharply as the mutation took place inside and outside her body. May started to feel extreme pain in her body. It showed on her face, even though she completely lost her consciousness. This was the sign for Mark to start his work. With his hand covered with milky white light, Mark pressed his palms on May's head. May suddenly started making painful sounds, even though Mark was trying to alleviate the pain for her. "Damn it, this strange power can't fully mitigate the pain," Mark grumbled. Now that he realized, this was the first time that Mark actually witnessed someone ingesting a second, physical crystal that contained a mutated ability. Consuming an empty one to become evolvers and a filled one to become a mutator. Both those instances could be handled by Mark. However, it seemed that this ability was not enough for the second time of consuming a mutation crystal. TCH. Mark clicked his tongue. I should have tried it on someone else first. It was an oversight on his part. He was conserving the crystals and abilities too much that it did not enter his mind. Although he knew that the pain would get worse for consuming another crystal, he thought that his ability would still be of help. Now, he was regretting it once more. Mark's heart that was empty before the apocalypse was now felt like getting torn apart as he watched May suffer in pain. No, I should try something else, Mark grumbled as he racked his brain. And the idea came around immediately. The skill he attained as an empath. It was the ability to absorb and relay the emotional fluctuations of a target to others. And there it was. The ability to absorb. There was no need to relay it, even though Mark would likely suffer a concentrated amount. But that did not matter. Mark was willing to suffer for May and the little girls. And there, he started to grit his teeth as his eyes glowed bright red, even releasing sparks of red electricity around it. But then, an unexpected reaction occurred. The moment he activated his empathic ability, the milky light covering his hand started to swirl. Then, instead of just the negative emotional energy from the pain, the actual sensation that May was feeling all over her body began to flood into Mark instead. Guh! A painful growl almost escaped Mark's mouth. With the combination of these two psychic abilities, May's complexion started to become better. She was still in pain, but it was greatly alleviated for her. It was all thanks to the sudden reaction of the two abilities fused together. Mark, on the other hand, was doing his best to not make a sound. He was gritting his teeth too much that his gums started to tear. It was too painful. He could feel what exactly May was feeling during the process of her mutation. It was as expected of the nature of rainbow dragascales. This was a mutation on the skin, and as such, the pain was also there. It was more concentrated on the arms and legs, though. Mark squinted his eyes. He could feel as if his skin was started to tear to pieces. In fact, as he felt the pain, he could see May's skin starting to crack and tear. However, there was no blood. It was because the torn skin did not form a wound at all. Instead, a new layer of skin covered the torn part as soon as it opened. It was like how snakes shed their skin. The process continued like that, with Mark taking most of the burden and suffering for May. 2 hours later, Mark had become numb to the repeated feeling of his skin being torn apart. It was because May's skin did the same all over her body. Several layers of skin were repeatedly torn and were replaced as if tuning the best kind of skin that was compatible with her body. It repeated and repeated for the next 2 hours. Finally, the tearing stopped, and the pain started to subside. Mark felt freed from the torture, but then, arg! Mark gasped. A sudden surge of pain was suddenly channeled to him from May. He almost removed his hands from May's head but managed to persevere. Still, it was too painful. The pain was on his back, and for sure, May was feeling the same. And then, the pain suddenly intensified. His hands were already shaking, trying to maintain his current posture. But then, with another burst of intense pain, he finally let go. It was not because he removed his hand, though. His hands were forced away. The still unconscious Maze suddenly sat up. Bam! The scene in front of Mark made his eyes turn wide. May's wings opened wide while she was still unconscious, but that was not the issue. May's bat-like wings that had a reddish-black color due to being a blood demon was now covered with red scales with a rainbow-colored sheen. And as Mark looked closely, the scales that covered her arms and legs had the same color. It looked like May transformed subconsciously. Because of this, some parts of her clothes got torn off. Still, the scene in front of Mark was stunning. May's wings now looked like it was layered with sparkling red gems instead of scales. And while Mark stared at that scene, May's wings and scales disappeared, and her body plopped back to the bed. Mark carefully checked her. It looked like that the painful part of her mutation had passed after more than 2 hours. He expected it to be longer, but it seemed that having a body of a blood demon made her adapt to it faster. Still, with a wry smile, Mark looked around May. Her mutation this time looked messy with her shed skin scattered around the bed. There was even leftover skin stuck to her body. "I should clean up first before I start my turn," Mark murmured and stood up. Bam! Mark's body had slammed to the ground uncontrollably. "My whole body is numb." "I didn't notice." Enduring the numbness, Mark slowly stood up. He called for anyone to bring a towel and a bowl of water. Unexpectedly, it was Hannah who was available and gave what he requested. She timidly asked what the items were for when she saw a glimpse of May and the mess on the bed. Of course, she was surprised as she had no idea what happened. Still, she asked if she could be of any help. Mark declined, though. When Hannah left, Mark removed May's clothes, leaving her underwear alone. Gently, he removed the stuck skin on her body, wiped her clean with the wet towel, gave her a new change of clothes, and cleaned the bed. Finishing the work, Mark smiled, patting May's head gently. This was a step forward for her. Now, her body would be far sturdier than before. Mark thought of giving her more than one crystal. However, considering how painful it was, Mark decided to do this sometime in the future. He would find ways to strengthen the white light on his hand first if he did not want to see her suffering while undergoing mutation. And this experience also made him think twice about letting the little girls undergo the same thing. It would be very questionable if their young mind and bodies would be able to handle the pain. Of course, it might not apply to Miracle. Still, it would be a gamble. With those thoughts, Mark stood up and sat in the farther corner of the room. It was his turn to use the crystals, and with May occupying the bed, he could not do it there lest he might disturb her. Mark looked at the crystals on his hand. There were 3 crystals. One crystal belonged to the older of the bone-armored brothers. The other was the new, lightning crystal. And the last one was the crystal that Bathala gave him. Should I use these one by one? Mark was contemplating. He wanted to use these 3 for himself. In the first place, the one from Bathala and the lightning crystal was for him. On the other hand, the swift bone armor was something he chose to address his weakness in terms of speed. The most ideal to do was one by one. After all, this would be an extremely painful experience. One crystal would be Mark's 3rd mutation. The first was his blood control, and the second was genetic adaptation. As for the other 2 crystals, one was more or less a psychic catalyst that would help him adjust his body to psychic abilities faster. The other was an actual psychic ability to control lightning. Since Mark already had 4 psychic abilities, consuming these 2 crystals might trigger some unexpected reaction. What should I do? Mark was troubled. Unfortunately, there was not enough time for him to consume it one by one. This world was not like a wuxia where characters were able to pass long periods of time cultivating without worries. Geez. Consume it all in one go, Mark decided. Even if there were unexpected reactions to happen, the most that he would suffer from was the pain. After all, these crystals were more or less configured to help the person consuming it. There were no accounts of consuming it turning into a disaster so far from both Mark's and Freed's memories. And as such, Mark put the 3 marble-sized crystals in his mouth, turning it all to dust that entered his body. But then, Mark looked at his hands, and then, at the different parts of his body. Nothing was happening. Earlier, the moment that May ingested the crystal, she immediately fell unconscious due to its effects. Several seconds after Mark swallowed the 3 crystals, nothing was happening. That was what Mark thought. Throb. Mark's eyes opened wide. His heart was beating loudly. Pain enveloped his senses. Crackle. He then noticed sparks coming out of his body. *T. Mark cursed. He did not expect this at all. Doing his best to ignore the pain he was in, he stood up and rushed towards the balcony. Crackle. Sparks of electricity continued to appear around his body as he ran. Reaching the balcony, Mark spread out his wings and flew away. Many people in the base were still awake at this point, and they all saw Mark flying away in a rush with his unsteady flight and sparks coming out of his body. These alarmed the people as they saw him rush towards the top of the mountain. Even in the darkness of the night, Mark was visible because of the bright sparks of electricity enveloping his body. Being seen as he flew away did not matter to Mark anymore. He only needed to fly away as fast and as far as he could. But then, midway up the mountain, Mark lost the feeling of his wings. Crash. Mark painfully crashed onto the ground. He tried to stand up, but the pain disabled him from doing so. Thus, he could only try to crawl and sit down on the ground. Still, it seemed that his current state would not allow him to do even sit down at all. Throb. Crackle. Crash. Pain in his body, the loud beat of his heart, and the spreading of electricity around him. Roar. This time, everyone witnessed the mountain getting enveloped in bright streaks of roaring lightning. Day 137 to 11:25 p.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon Province, Philippines. The instantaneous release of energy caused by an electrostatic discharge of 2 electrically charged mediums, it was what lightning was. Seeing these branching flashes of light in the sky, moving from cloud to cloud, or even towards the ground, was both fascinating and terrifying. The loud sound of thunder it creates and the damage it could possibly cause when hitting the ground could make many people scared. Lightning was not limited to the ones people could commonly see in the sky. There were those that could be seen in the distance but could not be heard at all. It was called heat lightning. There were also the dry lightning that would appear during dry thunderstorms. And there was the rarest observed by people, the ball lightning. An electrically charged ball of light hovering above ground like a St. Elmo's fire. Among many kinds of lightning that were known amongst men, it was the one that was still unexplained. And now, the people of the base were seeing an even more spectacular sight in the mountain. At the place where they saw Mark fly to, flashes of lightning accompanied by loud crackles were shot in every direction. It was even more amazing when some of it shot up towards the sky. It was an alarming sight for everyone, especially for those that saw Mark crash midway up the mountain. Those that witnessed what was happening called upon those that were already asleep. Soon, almost everyone that was in the base tonight was all looking up the mountain, worried about Mark. After all, very few were in the know of Mark's plans tonight. And those that knew what could have happened, like Odalina and Spera, could only gaze at the same mountain, confused as to what Mark did this time. From what they knew, Mark never mentioned that something like this would happen at all. However, this was when Colleen and Aphelia that stood with the maids, spoke. "This feels the same as that time, doesn't it?" Alana said, which immediately made Aphelia nod. "That time, isn't it? I does feel the same. What are you 3 talking about?" Colleen could not help but ask. "Well, it's back then when Master acquired the ability to control the miasma," Aphelia replied. "Only a few of us were present at that time. Odalina and the others could not understand it because they were not there. But for Aphelia and Colleen that were there at that time, they remembered it. The feeling when Mark was in the process of absorbing a powerful ability. Aphelia and Colleen were right in this regard. After all, Mark used both the crystal that Bathala gave him and the lightning crystal he acquired accidentally for the second time. However, there was one thing that was bugging Aphelia. Back in Arielis, they were used to seeing some of their people receiving crystals that Keeper collected. There were times that things like this happened. It was at those times that the ability seemed to be incompatible with the user of the crystal and started to rampage. Those times would cause a lot of destruction in the surroundings and most often lead to the user dying. It was also a very painful process, and even if the user managed to contain the new ability, there were chances that they would have mental and physical disabilities. This was the reason they did not advise consuming crystals more than necessary. Even Freed only had 3 before their planet blew up. Furthermore, there was another setback in this situation. If the psychic unfortunately died, Keeper would retrieve their abilities. As for those that had consumed crystals, however, only the first psychic ability could be retrieved while the remaining would be lost. It was why after everyone died in the final battle, only their original abilities remained. The only exception in this was Keeper herself, who had an odd psychic ability in the first place. That was why in the eyes of Aphelia and Iola, the way Mark absorbed his abilities was very strange. It was like he was always on the verge of going berserk, and yet, he would end up succeeding. In one word, chaotic. It was the right description to call the way that Mark grows stronger. Just the thought of that could make anyone worry. However, they could not do anything about it but trust that he would always succeed. While the whole base gazed on the mountain bathed in lightning, Mark, who was the cause of it all, was slumped on the ground, growling in pain. His clothes were all ripped to pieces and were entirely naked right now. Using all 3 crystals at the same time was a bad idea. A totally bad idea. Mark's body was enveloped in electricity that would explode from time to time, causing those lightning bolts that were flying everywhere. In that process, Mark felt being electrocuted with an extremely high voltage of electricity. His clothes were ripped to pieces and burned by these surges of electricity coming from his body. Even his skin had been burned countless times already. However, that was not the most painful thing that Mark was experiencing right at this moment. Currently, his head felt like it was going to split. No, it felt more like his head was being hammered by a baseball bat continuously. Still, that was not the worst. What Mark was suffering the most and caused him to be incapable of moving even a finger was his bones being ground to dust. Incompatibility, that was the issue. Mark understood it now. As he thought before, each mutator mutated in the ways suitable to their genetics and body. In that issue, not everyone had compatible genetic makeup for the mutated abilities that others had. And Mark's body that was not compatible with swift bone armor mutation started to suffer. Of course, because of the crystal's positive effects, this would not happen to other people. It was very likely that the ability would be downgraded to suit the person's genetic makeup without damaging their body. Unfortunately, the crystals had a different way of upgrading Mark, who was abnormal since the start. Who would have thought that the effects of the crystal would take advantage of Mark's regenerative abilities to rebuild his bones into ones perfectly suitable to the mutation? And now, he was suffering the insane pain of his bones being destroyed and regenerated over and over. If one was to see Mark right now, they would be terrified as Mark's body would deform from time to time due to the absence of bones in some parts of his body. Although his regeneration heals the destroyed bones almost immediately, this appearance was still horrifying. GAHA. Mark painfully coughed out blackish liquid as remains of his former bones were pushed out of his body. That black liquid flowed out of his mouth that he could not close at all. Bam! Another explosion of electricity made his body convulse painfully. Mark's eyes were blurry, he was losing consciousness. However, he should not. Mark opened his eyes wide, glowing red, forcing himself awake. It was painful. Maybe it would lessen if Mark lost consciousness. However, there was a feeling that Mark would lose if he did. Lose? To who? To what? Mark's mind was clouded. The burst of negative emotions he accumulated from his uncontrollable empathic abilities started to flood his consciousness. Would the pain end if I died here? It hurts. Just die and end everything here. Mark was already delirious. he started to feel that the pain was receding. No. A voice echoed inside Mark's mind. Suddenly, Mark was forced out of his delirious state, and the pain surged once more. These voices again. Mark complained in his mind. Still, thank you. I'm completely awake now. Mark was awake, yet he started to close his eyes. And then, red light covered his veins. At the same time, miasma started to envelop his body. Breathe as deep as I can. Contain everything inside. Mark screamed inside. And there, a change finally appeared. The black-colored miasma started to mix into the surges of electricity around his body. It was unexpected considering how miasma was supposed to do the opposite. Miasma should have absorbed the electricity instead, as it was a form of energy. And then, it finally dawned on Mark what was happening. Mark's body contained miasma and lightning was a form of energy. Thus, the ability to control lightning that was supposed to enter his body could not and continued to surge outside, harming him instead. But when he released miasma, the surges of electricity that covered his body started to absorb it and take on its properties. It did not take long. The surges of electricity, the streaks of lightning, started to lose its bright glow. Seeing that, Mark smiled slightly, despite the pain he was still experiencing. Black lightning. It does suit me better. That was right, the streaks of lightning that were supposed to be a convergence of light was now tainted black. Nevertheless, it felt closer to Mark's heart and mind compared to the usual lightning he knew. And then, boom! The earth and sky rumbled. Black streaks of lightning flew towards the sky like black dragons in the night. And then, flew back to Mark, entering his body. Throb. Mark froze. His body started to feel like it was pulsating at the same rhythm as his heartbeat. Arg. A surge of unimaginable pain caused Mark to roar. And the cause of it was the final adjustment of his body. And there, like what happened to May, his body started to transform uncontrollably. Mark's bones grew and changed shape as it tore through his skin. Thin sheets of metal like calcium growth covered his body, starting from his arms and legs. Unexpectedly, the bone armor had similar properties as his blood metal. Reddish-black in color, metal-like instead of bones-like, and it had a sinister appearance. Mark gasped as his transformation finished. Slowly, he stood up. His whole body was still numb from pain, but the pain had already subsided. Mark stood up and almost fell. He was still unsteady. As he lost balance, he could only rely on the rocky wall that was in front of him. He then dragged his body and sit down, leaning his back on that rock wall. He could not help but look around and felt lucky. It seemed that he crashed at the rocky part of the mountain and not in the middle of the forest. If the latter actually happened, everything would be on fire now. Mark looked at the armor covering his body. This looks nice. He smiled. It was a painful experience. No, hellish to be exact. But it seemed that the result was worth it. Mark opened his palm covered with his new armor. Crackle. Sparks of electricity appeared. It was black. As he willed, it formed into a crackling black ball and he stretched his arm with his palm facing a huge rock nearby. Rumble. The roar of thunder echoed as the black ball of lightning shot towards the rock. It left a foot-diameter scorched mark on the face of the rock, with cracks at the center. It's weaker, huh? Mark mumbled. However, it was within his expectations. After all, he was supposed to be unable to use any psychic abilities at all after absorbing a new one. The crystal Bathala gave worked properly, it seemed. Mark could not confirm if that crystal actually worked by just feeling it. It was because he could not feel any changes in his body that it could have caused aside from being able to use psychic abilities right after he succeeded in absorbing the crystal. While Mark was contemplating, he suddenly squinted his eyes. That was when he noticed as he looked up in the sky. The sun is already rising, huh? Because of the painful experience, Mark did not notice that he was in that state for the latter half of the night. Mark wanted to return already, but his body was still numb. That was when someone appeared. Why you? What did you do? Of course, There was only one person that Mark knew that could appear suddenly like a mushroom. It was no other than Forth, who seemed to have rushed here from somewhere far. Day 138 to 5:47 a.m. Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon Province, Philippines. Mark stared at Forth with his eyes half closed from fatigue. Not only was he too tired to respond to her, but he also did not know what expression he should show in this situation. It was entirely unexpected that she would appear here right now. Comparing the previous circumstances, he completely fused with Freed's psychic ability, or when Chio, the night-evered spirit tree, was born, he believed that the events this time was more discreet. "Hey, I'm talking to you." Forth approached Mark in an agitated manner since he was not replying to her. "Can you pipe it down? I'm tired," Mark complained, making the girl speechless. "I know I should feel amused that you can actually talk to someone like me that way, but right now, I can't." Forth was raising her small voice. "Did you know that you caused the flow of energy to become unstable for several hundred miles? Do you know where I came from before I got here? I'm in Indonesia, and I finally found another eligible candidate, but I had to stop meeting her immediately because I saw that lightning strike, soaring in the sky all the way from this place." Mark was quite surprised after hearing that. He remembered that there were some streaks of lightning shooting off from his body earlier, but he never expected that those were able to reach other countries. "But that's only lightning," Mark reasoned. "Only lightning, you said? Only lightning? You say that hundreds of lightning bolts at a tribulation strength soaring the sky, only lightning?" Forth was definitely agitated. As she shouted her concerns, even the temperature in the surroundings was getting colder. "So, are you going to kill me?" Mark suddenly asked with his half-closed stare. That question, however, made Forth freeze. Aye. Forth was at a loss for words. She was agitated, but she did not have that intention. Instead, she was worried. "What are you worried about then?" Mark asked another question, which made Forth even more silent. She did not expect that he could tell what she was feeling. And then, with deep breaths and her vertical eyes blinking, she asked Mark, "What kind of God are you aiming for?" That question suddenly came out of nowhere, making Mark unable to reply. "I'm sure you already know the potential you and your partner have, right? The potential to step into the realm of deities or even become gods. Then tell me, what kind of God are you aiming for?" With those words, Forth stepped even closer. "I have no ability to see what specific skills you have, but I can tell how much chaotic your existence is. Not only me, anyone in the realm of deities or above would be able to tell. Last time, I still didn't mind it. But after 3 days, your existence became even more chaotic. In this course, there's only one thing you might end up: a deity or god of chaos." Mark's half-closed eyes fully opened. That was unexpected information from this girl in front of him. Still, god of chaos? That doesn't sound bad at all. Forth's eyes opened wide. "Why you? Do you know what you are saying?" "What? That's the issue here. I don't know what you are talking about at all. If you are talking about a primeval god, I don't think there would be any issues. But I guess you are talking about a literal chaotic god. Either way, I'm fine with any of the two." Forth stared at Mark, stumped. She was feeling amused at Mark but troubled at the same time. With a sigh, she started to explain. "I'm talking about the literal one, the deities and gods of chaos. There's very few in Earth's history and literature, but they do exist in other universal dimensions. And they were among the most hated kinds of gods." Hearing up to that, Mark smiled. "I guess I can see your point there. Chaos. Unpredictable and unstable. Am I right?" Mark's words made Forth nod. Deities and gods of chaos wield powerful abilities over different elements in existence. You can say that they were strong enough to sit just below deities and gods of creation. But still, because of their chaotic nature, no one could predict their course of action. In a tick, they could be good deities and gods, but in another step, they might turn evil. "Well, that's just perfect for me, don't you think?" Mark asked. "Why you, Arg? I don't know anymore." Mark's question made Forth start to throw a tantrum. But then, Fourth, you are being unsightly again. A strict-sounding female voice sounded as someone's existence slowly solidified in Mark's detection. Mark raised his head while Fourth turned behind her in a startle. Third, what are you doing here? Fourth exclaimed. Several meters above the mountain, a woman wearing a black kimono floated like a ghost. She had white hair and blue eyes that shined even under the sun like Fourth. She had 3 eyes on her face, but it was unexpectedly arranged in a way that one would expect of someone having a third eye. She had a cold expression on her face as if she was an embodiment of strictness. And to Fourth's question, the woman replied, "And why won't I be? Remember whose area of jurisdiction is above yours." Fourth could not retort at all. The eye in charge of East Asia was third, after all, and considering the situation, there was no actual need to ask why she was here. It was obviously because of Mark. I came to check where the disturbance is coming from, and I found the lead going to your area of jurisdiction. There is no rule for us not enter others' territory, so I kept on going. It is quite unexpected for me to see you here, though. R. Fourth stared at Third with subtle groaning from her mouth. That was when Third's eyes fell on Mark. Care to tell me what that is? Sure enough, Mark's existence also intrigued her. It's none of your concern, go home. Fourth shouted. It seemed that the little girl did not have close connections with this woman. Hearing that, Third frowned. As usual, you don't have any ounce of beauty at all. That's none of your business. That definitely irked Fourth. It seemed that she also hated that fact, given that she had a terrifying arrangement of her eyes. It's disgusting to see how you two bicker like this. Suddenly, another voice echoed. Both Third and Fourth turned to the source of the voice. Mark was the same. There, another woman stood by the shade of a tall rock. Leaning on that rock, it was a woman with 8 eyes. Her eyes were arranged like a funnel web spider's eyes. She was wearing tight-fitting clothes made of questionable material. She looked scary, especially with her greenish-black hair that seemed to ooze of poison. In any case, although she called the behavior of Third and Fourth as disgusting, her appearance suited the word more. 12th. Third frowned. What are you doing here too? Fourth cried out. Isn't it obvious? The same as her. 12th pointed her chin towards Third. Still, I didn't expect to see something like that here. Of course, this disgusting woman was referring to Mark. Seeing the appearance of the 2 new eyes, Mark turned to Fourth. Is this what you are truly worried about? Not exactly. Fourth was about to cry. I didn't expect these two to be overly curious and come here either. Mark could tell why Fourth was very bothered. Not only were these 2 intruded in her area of jurisdiction, but these 2 were stronger than her, especially that woman called 12th. However, there was nothing that could be done now. Like Third that was in charge of East Asia, this 12th might also be in charge of a nearby territory. Most likely, Oceania, considering that she appeared from the east direction and Third appeared from the north. In any case, things became troublesome for Fourth. Mark wanted to leave. Just Fourth alone would make him feel that he was walking on the edge of a blade, not to mention 3 of them. However, Mark was still numb. He could barely move a muscle. That was when, with a flash of bright light, May surprisingly appeared beside Mark. There was no warning at all, even from Mark's ring. Furthermore, she was in full battle gear and with her new ability in full display. She even brought Ignis with her. Mayor, what are you doing here? Mark was quite surprised by her sudden appearance. And by the looks of it, it was not long since she woke up and already headed here. Amy said that Gerger might be in danger. I came rushing first. The others will come later. May replied, glaring at the unfamiliar women in front of them. She was familiar with Fourth, seeing her 3 days ago, and Mark said that she was not an enemy. It meant that the danger might come from the 2 unfamiliar women. Hearing that, Mark became troubled. If they were really to fight these eyes, it would be questionable if they would win at all. Master. Ignis's voice echoed in Mark's mind. Are you okay? My body is all numb, but I'm fine, regardless, Mark replied. Anyways, can you intercept the others and send this Mark then created a rectangular plate of blood metal with letters inscribed on it. But Ignis hesitated to leave just when he had just arrived. "I'll trust you on this, all right?" Mark hung the plate on Ignis with a metal hook. "It's better if they don't come here." Hearing that he was being trusted, Ignis flew away carrying the metal plate. It should be a message to stop the others from coming here. "You have some interesting toys, don't you?" 12th spoke to Mark. Seeing Ignis fly away, she was also looking at May, quite amazed. On the other hand, 3rd. How? 3rd shouted. "How can such a beauty exist?" There was no need to ask. 3rd was staring at May, wide-eyed. That stare, however, made May feel shivers on her spine. With her reflex actions, she tried to hide behind Mark as much as she could. 4th, tell me. Mark frowned. Is that one a pervert? 4th did not know what to reply, instead. How disgusting. 12th straight up said while staring at 3rd's unsightly behavior. Those remarks made 3rd snap out of it and realized that everyone here was looking at her with disgust. Ahem. Pardon my unsightly actions, 3rd said, fixing her posture. Nevertheless, her eyes were still stuck onto May. The tense atmosphere is suddenly gone, huh? 4th murmured, amused as she assessed the sudden change in the situation. Can we just leave? Mark asked 4th. I want to leave too, you know? It's not amusing to be left here alone with these two. 4th wanted to do the same. However, it would be difficult to do so, especially since Mark and May got the attention of the two. And as it was 4th's territory, she could not leave Mark and May alone. Seriously, this is all your fault, you know that? 4th was blaming Mark. In any case, we're leaving. All you three are eyes. Sort this yourself. Mark said as he nodded to May. May then grabbed onto his arm as they both turned into surge black mist that moved fast down the mountain. And of course, the three eyes stared surprised. Mark and May suddenly vanished like that, leaving barely any traces. Hey, don't leave me alone here, 4th cried out. In fact, she could leave immediately since she could instantly move from place to place up to a certain distance. However, she could not leave 3rd and 12th alone, lest they do some unwanted things in her territory. Seriously, things became complicated because of Mark's carelessness. Day 138 to 7:23 a.m. Living room, Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon Province, Philippines. Mark escaped the scene with May's help, alternating their movement abilities while returning to the base. But of course, there was no way that 4th would not chase after the culprit of the current situation. And now, Mark could only sign in annoyance as three beings that he did not want to lurk around were currently sitting in his living room. Furthermore, it was 4th who brought the other two back like this place was her own house. After suffering for half of the night, Mark wanted to rest, but now, he was forced to watch over the three in case they tried to something in his place. Right now, because of the presence of the three, the whole base was silent. Even crickets would not dare make noise at this point. It was because of the suffocating feeling that everyone had after the three arrived together. Even the maids and the children had to go out of the house for now. Only he and May were left behind, being able to resist the feeling to a great extent. Can you three go somewhere else? Or just leave already? Mark grumbled with a frown. He would respect anyone worthy of it. These three in front of him, however, did not deserve an ounce of respect for him. It was even more after barging into his place uninvited. You're an odd one, aren't you? 12th said. Other people might be begging for any of us to visit them. Yet, you're straightforwardly kicking the three of us out. That is right. 3rd chimed in. You can't even serve your guests a cup of tea. Just be glad that we're here to visit this unsightly cave of yours. Mark did not mind what the spider-eyed woman said, but this pervert was irking him more than 9th did before. Furthermore, she was quite hostile towards him. Ignoring the two, Mark turned to 4th. Just why did you bring them here? I didn't bring them here, they forced me to lead them here. 4th cried out. This girl genuinely disliked her two guests, but it seemed that she could not do anything to push them away. As for Mark, he could not fathom why would 3rd and 12th insist on coming here. Even if Mark caused a commotion, it was of no concern for the eyes, as they were just sent now to spread the news of the second wave and not to meddle in mortal affairs. Don't worry. 12th shrugged. We have no ill will coming here. I don't know about 3rd, but I'm just curious. Who would think that a place like this exists in this small country? Furthermore, there's also you, she added. Now I understand where all those disturbances in the past months came from. It's all from you, isn't it? Mark stared at 12th. She was on point. In the past, there were also disturbances from unknown sources. These past months, however, Mark was the primary cause. Furthermore, not only here, but he also got involved in some things in America. And you? Mark turned to 3rd. I am the same. 3rd fixed her dangling hair. Though I'm more interested in that beautiful spirit tree you have here and that woman beside you. Hearing those words made May shrink beside Mark. She grabbed Mark's arm tightly, staring sharply on 3rd. It was the wrong move, however, as it seemed that 3rd became more entranced at May's current expression. Can you stop that? Mark's eyes grew cold. To Mark's words, 3rd's eyes turned towards him with sharpness. Who do you think you are to order me? Beauty is to be appreciated. Someone unsightly as you is not someone for me to listen to. In fact, can you not cover her? Please, get out of the way. Of course, Mark would not take that lightly. So, you want me to stay quiet while letting you stare like a pervert at my wife? Mark said threateningly. Is that what you wanted to say? Just who do you think you are? Mark's sudden threatening attitude surprised 4th and 12th. Even those half-step deities would not have the courage he had. After all, the eyes were more or less the administrators of Earth. No one in the right mind would dare provoke them despite knowing what they were. Nevertheless, 3rd's reaction was even more unexpected. What did you say? She's the wife of someone with an unsightly appearance like you? Impossible. Impossible. You. She snapped. 4th could not help but murmur as they watched 3rd's current state. On the other hand, with Mark being degraded like that, May's eyes were about to spurt fire as she hatefully stared at 3rd. But then, 3rd did something that both 4th and 12th did not expect. You must have done something to her. I will unveil the truth. Those words of 3rd made 4th and 12th's eyes grow wide. Stop. Don't. The two cried out. However, the two were late. 3rd already used her main ability. Asterisk asterisk. What the hell is this? 3rd cried out as she found herself in an endless void. Dark. Everything was dark. The third eye, the embodiment of aesthetic appreciation. That was who 3rd was. She bore the title as the judge of beauty among the eyes. And her ability was to enter the minds of people, read their memories, and judge the person's inner beauty. As she could not believe that someone with an appearance as Mark managed to snag a beauty with a goddess-like appearance, she suspected that he used some underhanded methods to do it. Thus, she used her ability, targeting Mark. 3rd entered Mark's consciousness in an attempt to read his memories. However, she suddenly found herself wandering in an endless void. For the first time, aside from their master, 3rd felt fear from something else. Happy now? As 3rd wandered in fear, a voice was heard in her ear. The voice could not be any familiar. Why you? How? 3rd turned around, looking for the source of the voice. However, she did not see anyone. Show yourself, she shouted. Quite a nerve you have. You enter my consciousness, and you behave arrogantly. You better leave if you don't want me to consume you. Mark spoke, showing himself walking out from the void. Impossible. This is impossible. Sure enough, 3rd saw something that rarely existed on beings at Mark's level. For one to be able to enter his own consciousness was not a feat that just anyone could do. Impossible here, impossible there. You're noisy. This is the last warning. Leave. Mark warned for the last time. Hemp. 3rd huffed. You think you can force me out? No matter what you try to do, I won't get out until I find the truth. Sure enough, this woman was a narrow-minded one. She could not believe that someone like May had fallen for Mark. Furthermore, it seemed that she knew that Mark could not consume her as he had said. After all, he would receive the ire of the other eyes if he was to kill her. Then, suit yourself. Mark smiled sinisterly. This suddenly gave Third the chills. It was true that Mark could not kill her because of the possible repercussions. However, it did not mean that he would not harm her. And with that creepy smile, Mark vanished in the void once more. Third was quite surprised that Mark suddenly retreated like that. However, her goal came first. She immediately used her ability, finding a door to Mark's memories. Now floating in the void, a black door appeared. Not minding the creepiness of the door, Third dove inside. It was a mistake. Third opened her eyes widely in shock. The scene before her was even worse than hell itself. The cries of thousands of infants as their bodies were slowly roasted over the blazing fire entered her ears. The scene of ghoulish humans being chopped alive to pieces by unsightly deformed multi-headed monsters that drank their fresh blood and feasted on their oozing flesh. Beautiful women being mutilated like dolls by a gigantic baby that had a mouth instead of eyeballs on its eye sockets. Bloated and desiccated corpses being torn apart by ghouls, playing with and eating their rotten guts and flesh. Humans sitting silently at the side as maggots slowly ate their flesh alive. Ugh! Third felt nauseous. She wanted to vomit, but as nothing but consciousness without a body, it was impossible. Without being able to release the urging fleeing on her throat, she started to suffer. And finally, Third could not handle it anymore. With the collapse of her mind, she retreated. ******* In a flash, Third returned to reality. Everything felt longer, but in fact, barely a second passed outside. Both 4th and 12th were still in the position to stop her, but the two froze. They stared at Third with unconcealed shock. Third's eyes were flowing with blood. The eyes might be beings not born biologically. Nevertheless, they were alive and similar to humans, they could be hurt or bleed. But to suddenly tear up with blood, something must have happened. They could not help but look at Mark, who was sinisterly smiling at Third's state. "I warned you." Mark spoke, making the dazed Third look at him. But then, "Erp." That sound from Third made Mark grab May and they turned into black mist and materialized in the far corner of the room. 4th and 12th were also surprised, but they were able to react and jumped away from the table. Blurg. Third vomited on the table. However, since she seemed to have not eaten anything, it was nothing but saliva and gastric juice. "How disgusting," 12th delightedly remarked. That made Third snap out of her daze and realized what she had done. Feeling the trickle of liquid on her face, she wiped it with her hands and found out it was blood. Third was shocked at her own unsightly display. She turned her head at Mark. Unexpectedly, tears were accumulating in her eyes. Without saying anything, she floated and rushed out to the exit. There, she left just like that. "I guess I'm leaving too." 12th suddenly lost the urge to stay and made her way out without waiting for any reply. Finally, only 4th was left among the eyes. "I'm going to leave, too." 4th turned to Mark but suddenly found him glaring at her. "Clean that before you leave." Mark pointed at the mess that Third made. "You're asking someone like me to clean? Are you nuts?" 4th cried out. "I don't know what you did, but isn't it your fault? You are the one that brought them here, right?" Mark argued. "Besides, maybe you can put that mess in a bottle or something and label it with that woman's name. You can use it to blackmail her." 4th froze. That was an amusing idea but disgusting at the same time. However, it would surely be effective towards Third, who was someone highly concerned about the aesthetical display of things. "You sure have some amusing ideas, don't you?" 4th complimented. "But I'm not cleaning this. I'll send someone else," 4th said as she teleported away. Mark closed his eyes, checking if the other two truly left. Feeling them leave the area of his detection, Mark was finally able to feel relieved. He then slumped on the floor, with May worrying about him. It was not surprising that he felt drained. He just underwent that painful experience last night, and now, he had to create a highly detailed world in his consciousness that was able to affect an existence at the level of that I called third. Nevertheless, it was good that the nuisance finally left. He did not want to deal with those beings anymore. Since Fourth said that she would bring someone else to clean the mess, Mark and May left the room and forbidden anyone from entering it. 5 minutes later, Fourth actually returned. She was with a humanoid creature with a maid-like appearance. It was quite unexpected that she really took Mark's suggestion to heart. Day 138 to 10:23 a.m. Cliff House, Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon Province, Philippines. With the eyes leaving, Mark could finally feel relieved as he ate his late breakfast. Or so it should be. But now, sitting in front of Mark on the opposite side of the table, there was Fourth. "Just what are you even doing here?" Mark grumbled as Odalina served his and May's breakfast. Ignoring Mark's words, Fourth looked at Odalina and spoke. "Can I have some too?" That question made Odalina troubled as she looked at Mark. Odalina was calm most of the time. Still, the suffocating aura around the eyes affected her. "Huh." Mark sighed. "Just give her some, but give her a cup of milk instead." "Yes." Odalina replied. The food was nothing but a cup of coffee and fried meatloaf slices, though. "Hey, don't treat like a kid. I want coffee too," Fourth grumbled. "Okay, then. Give this girl a cup coffee." Mark gave up. This girl was definitely treating his home as her own. That was when Odalina left for the kitchen to make another breakfast serving. As she was getting her own serving, Fourth sat satisfied. "You're really treating my place as your own, aren't you?" Mark asked. "What's wrong with it? Other people would be glad if they were you." Mark frowned. Still, that would be undoubtedly true, especially for religious fanatics. If they could handle the eye's presence, that is. "Don't you have work to do? You had been grumbling about needing to go here when you found another candidate earlier, right?" Mark reminded the girl. "I already did that. I left earlier, remember?" That was right. Fourth left earlier for about an hour before popping out inside Mark's house once again. "So, why are you here again?" Of course, Mark would ask that question. "I just want to relax a bit. Can't I do that? Even beings like us grow tired, you know?" Fourth replied as if it was a matter of fact. "Then go relax somewhere else. Just your presence makes people suffocate, you know that." "Ah." Hearing Mark's words made Fourth stare at him like she had a big glowing question mark above her head. "I forgot. How about this?" As Fourth said that, her suffocating presence started to shrink until it was unnoticeable. "Is this fine now?" Fourth asked as the suffocating feeling was finally gone. "You can actually do this." Mark sure was pissed. Everyone had been suffering because of the divine-like pressure that was coming from the eyes every time they were present. And now, to think that she could actually hide it but just did not bother to do it. "Of course, we can, or else. How do you think we are able to hide ourselves if we always have that kind of presence around us?" Those words made Mark remember Ninth. He did not have such a presence while he was hiding himself. Even Chemetris could not tell at all, and Mark could only find Ninth because of his emphatic ability. "But that didn't answer why you were relaxing here," Mark questioned once more. "Then, where do you think that I can go to relax?" Fourth grumbled. "We eyes are not tireless robots, and we take breaks from our duties from time to time. Back then, I can sneak into amusement parks to relax." "Tell me, which amusement park is still open in these times? There isn't even a single peaceful playground left. If you want some peaceful place, why not clear the infected and make your own?" Mark suggested. "We are not allowed to do that. We are not allowed to even deal with the infected, you know that? To humans, the infected might be dead, hopeless, and unsavable beings. But they are still considered as inhabitants of this earth. If we touch even one of them without proper reason, we're going to receive punishment." It was one of the restrictions of being an eye. As long as it was not a purge intended to balance the state of the world, they were not allowed to make any movements. But that pervert invaded my consciousness earlier. Mark said, making Fourth smile bitterly. Well, yeah. That woman will definitely get called later. But you can't really blame her either. Why not blame her? Mark frowned deeply. It's not her position to dictate our relationship. Mark said, grabbing May's shoulder. To those words, Fourth shrugged. Because you should blame humans for that behavior. That sudden shift of blame made Mark and May confused. Their confusion triggered Fourth to tell a definite truth about her in the other eyes. Remember how I introduced myself? I'm sure Ninth did the same. So, it's really that, huh? Mark murmured, making Fourth surprised. What are you murmuring? Nothing. I just confirmed it from your words. All of you, eyes, are born from emotions of humans, isn't it? That's why when you and that other kid introduced yourselves, you added embodiment of something after your name. You. Really? Fourth was definitely amused. You are right. We are born from emotions that humans had, as humans are the reigning species on this planet. That is also why we had humanoid bodies by default. Also, depending on the emotion we are born from, it also affected our behavior. Third is the embodiment of aesthetic appreciation. In her eyes, only beauty is accepted. The way she behaved earlier, unable to believe the relationship of you two with contrasting appearances, it's exactly how common humans think, right? She's too beautiful for someone like you. A frog from aiming for a swan's meat. You're not compatible with each other. You will hear all sorts of those kinds of things from humans, right? Fourth titled her head. They say all those when a pair of lovers are in total contrast with each other. It might stem from either culture or personal mindset, but most humans think that way. Just like how Third behaved. Mark fell silent. It was an awful truth that was applicable to the majority of people on Earth. A beautiful woman, being paired with a handsome man, was justice. An ugly man should also pair with an ugly woman. Aiming any higher would make people shun you. If you managed to succeed, the other people's jealousy would target you. At this time, Odalina returned from the kitchen, bringing Fourth's food and coffee. Thank you. Fourth said to Odalina. This made everyone quite surprised. What's with those reactions? Fourth roared. I'm a woman who knows proper etiquette after receiving food, you all know that? But you didn't even utter a single thanks when you snatched my chocolates last time. Also, you look like a brat rather than a woman. Mark retorted, making Fourth pout. I was angry at that time, all right? My job had been taken away from me. I'll get scolded harshly. Also, I'm a proper woman. I may look like this because I got punished by Master, but I'm definitely several hundred times older than you. Fourth kept on roaring while stuffing her mouth with fried meatloaf. All right, all right. Mark raised his hands up. If he continued retorting, this brat would become noisier and noisier. He needed to just let her finish the food and make her go. Anyway, are you really weaker than those two? Mark asked as he was curious. He wanted to confirm something. And to that question, Fourth looked down, tapping her plate with the spoon she was holding. No. I'm not really any less stronger than them before the outbreak. But in this state, even if I didn't get punished, I can't stay in the dimension line. Mark's curiosity was piqued. He even heard a term that he had not heard of before. Then, why are you weaker now, aside from being punished that you just said? I guess, there's no issue telling you all this. Fourth looked at Mark, May, and Odalina. We are the embodiment of human emotions. Remember? We grow stronger or weaker depending on the emotions that humans in the majority had. Like me, I'm the embodiment of amusement. The more that people seek amusement and feel it, the more I gain power. But I bet you know the state of the people after this apocalypse started. Mark was right in his other assumption. Being the embodiment of human emotions, their strength also relied on humans. With Fourth being the embodiment of amusement, it was no surprise that she grew weaker after the outbreak started. When the world started to end, most humans lost the urge to find amusement and feel it, and instead, focused on survival. Some even succumbed to fear and agony. The necessity to have fun was also diminished. And for Fourth, Mark's base was like a paradise on Earth, as everyone was able to live in a more carefree manner, able to maintain the urge to find amusement and happiness in their lives. With all these in mind, Mark's urge to kick Forth out of his base lessened and just let her enjoy things as long as she did not cause any trouble. While they were talking, they did not realize that it was already almost lunchtime. At this point, some people entered the door to the dining room. Looking at them, they were no one else but Spera that brought the three girls home from their morning lessons. Papa. Mama. Miracle rushed towards Mark and May from the door, with Abigail immediately behind her. Spera and Iola were left behind with bitter smiles while looking at the two. Mark patted the heads of the two girls while they both received a hug from May. You are surprisingly gentle to these girls that are not even your own blood and flesh. Forth spoke, amused at the scene in front of her. Maybe not flesh, but my blood definitely runs inside them. Mark retorted. This was also when the girls noticed the visitor. Of course, Spera, who knew Forth, was immediately on guard. You lass there. You don't have to be on guard. I'm just here to relax. Forth spoke to Spera before turning to the girls. Now that you mention it, your family seems to have an odd aura. Wait. Why did you all have demonic auras anyway? All of you definitely felt human, well aside from you, Mr. Chaotic. It seemed that Forth finally noticed. By the looks of it, she had not been paying attention before. This, however, made Mark a bit confused. Mark was a pure blood demon, and following the story, it was the eyes that instigated the extinction of blood demons in the past. However, she did not seem to have any idea or familiarity with the aura of blood demons at all. This made Mark test the waters a bit. Do you know about blood demons? Mark asked. Blood demons, you say? Forth replied, thinking while waving her spoon. Nevertheless, it seemed that she could not recall. Mark decided to add to the details. It's a race of demons living in the border of the overworld and the underrealm of the spirit dimension several thousands of years ago. Their race that went extinct after they were attacked by the denizens of upper and lower dimensions. Forth was surprised. You mean that race? You remember now? The race that you eyes schemed to eliminate? Ah, of course, I won't forget. 10th and 18th led the upper and lower dimensions to eliminate that race because they are becoming too powerful. Their very existence was a threat to the balance at that time. Mark frowned. It seemed that he learned about the extinction of the blood demons were true. If that was the case, it was better to disassociate those events from him and his family. But then, before Mark could speak another word, Forth dropped a bomb. Of course, that's only what it was on the surface. The true reason they were eliminated is because the blood of their race at that time had been contaminated without them knowing. Mark was definitely surprised by this reveal. Can you tell me more details about that? Mark could not help but ask. Day 138 to 11:22 a.m. Dining room, Cliff House, Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon Province, Philippines. First-hand information about what happened to the blood demons. There was no way that Mark would let this pass. The lost demon race that almost no one knew about. Right now, only the eyes and the observer might possibly know about what truly happened. Even the things that Bathala showed to them were just what happened in the eyes of everyone that saw it. There was nothing about the actual reason why their extinction was orchestrated by the observer and the eyes. And now, Forth was talking about the blood of the blood demons being contaminated. It was highly important information for Mark, especially now that it was revealed that he had the ancestry of that extinct race. Unexpectedly, Forth only looked at Mark with a tilt of her head and did not ask the reason why he wanted to know. And after that, she did not hesitate to tell Mark as she asked him a supposed to be an unrelated question. You know about his eyes from a recluse god, right? Forth asked. Then, you must know the primary duty of the eyes was after the previous observer was replaced. Ousting the foreign gods and deities, Mark replied. Yup. Forth nodded as she ate another piece of meatloaf. Although we did not manage to make all of them leave, and some are still left hiding, at least we minimized their influence on Earth. Looking for the remaining foreign gods and deities on Earth aside, Do you think that it's over with that? Of course, not. Even thought we already reinforced the dimension line. There are still other gods that would come here from time to time. And it was the duty of the eyes to stop them. According to Fourth, this had been ongoing since the current observer took the position. Even though they already did all they could to chase away the foreign gods that walked this world in the past using various means, new ones would just keep coming. No, rather, it would be strange if not a single new one would arrive, considering that some did it in the past. It was just the eyes doing their best on their duties and let Earth traverse its right course. And of course, not every god was cooperative. So, the purging that the blood demons went to is caused by one of those gods? Mark asked. Yeep. That's right. Fourth nodded. We learned of it late, though. Apparently, an evil god managed to force his way through the dimension line. The dimension line had many meanings. Some call it the dimensional wall or rift. It was the line of space separating this universe's dimension and others. This was a dangerous place as the space in the dimension line was highly unstable. A normal person would not take even a millisecond before getting ripped apart after stepping inside. However, there were some existences that were capable of traversing it. It was the gods and deities. Of course, there were also others that were just lucky to traverse it. There were also some circumstances that a normal soul or person would be allowed to travel across with the help of an observer or god. And to say, that evil god that managed to force himself through was not a pushover. It took all the eyes to fight that evil god, and the battle even affected Earth. It caused some unexpected natural disasters to appear at that time. In the end, they managed to kill that evil god at the expense of a few eyes. But when they thought that it was over, after more than a millennia, they learned that that battle with the evil god caused a race to emerge. It's them, the blood demons. The very first blood demon, the ancestor, was actually not born as one. He was a half-demon half-spirit, being born from an unwanted relationship between red demon man and a nature spirit woman. Of course, before the ancestor could even know his ancestry, he was thrown into a river at the border of the underworld and the overworld. It was not because his parents wanted to, but they had no choice. Relationships between demons and spirits are forbidden, is it? Mark said, which made Fourth nod. The hate is more on the spirit's side, though. Most demons won't really care about something like that. Both the parents of the ancestor died in that event. Unknown to everyone, that event was happening at the same time that the battle with the evil god happened. During the battle, it was impossible that the other dimensions on Earth were not affected. In that fight, several rifts between the dimensions opened up. Unfortunately, in one of those rifts, the blood of the evil god dripped. And from the very slim chance that it happened, that drop of blood fell on the infant ancestor's mouth. And there, the first blood demon was born. By luck, the ancestor was found and raised by an old spirit couple that did not mind whether he was a demon or not. That caused the ancestor to become someone considered as a good demon. After the old couple passed away, he had lost his place. He was not a spirit and was almost killed by that fact. Unfortunately, he was not welcomed in the underworld either, as something unknown to them. Thus, he claimed the border between the two areas of the spirit dimension, being able to live there because of his resistance towards the effects of the border to demons and spirit races. From there, many things happened which led the ancestor to lead his own race after learning his abilities by accident. The race slowly grew as beings that shared his ideals flocked to him. It was unknown when it started, but their race became the guards that stopped a lot of wars between demons and spirits from happening. Being the ancestor and founder of the race, his people worshipped him. Soon, he was slowly making his way to step into deityhood. That was where the problem occurred. Do you know what gods do in order to experience life as a mortal without actually coming into a mortal world? Fourth asked, which made Mark remember a certain fact that he watched from animes. Avatars. Wow. You actually know. Fourth was amused. That's right. God avatars. The use of it isn't really forbidden as the avatar itself had no recollection of being a part of a god. In fact, on Earth, there are a few avatars allowed to walk with our master's permission. And that was where the contamination lay. It was the blood of that evil god that created the blood demons. A catalyst to give birth to his avatars. God avatars would live and die like a human. However, it was different if they started to step into the way of deityhood. When it happened, there were two possibilities that could happen. If the god was alive, they could possess their avatar. On the other hand, a dead god could resurrect through that avatar. The ascension of the ancestor of blood demons into deityhood could cause the resurrection of that evil god to happen. In fact, every blood demon could cause it once they stepped into that path. It was lucky that they managed to find it out before the ancestor became a deity. Mark was forcing himself to be calm at this point. How can a dead god get resurrected through that anyway? Mark asked. Well, you see, the body of a god can be killed, but it doesn't mean that it would be easy to abolish their soul. As long as the root of their soul remains, they can come back at some point, especially using an avatar they left before they died. Fourth explained. Then, why did you guys have to use other races to kill the blood demons? Mark asked another question. Huh? Fourth sighed. Do you remember? We are not allowed to directly influence the inhabitants of Earth. Killing them with our own hands is out of the question. Blood demons are included in that since they are all Earthborn. Although we can actually do that, we will suffer heavy repercussions for going against our own rules. It's not like the blood demons had actually done a crime either. We are just preventing a possible catastrophe. And think about it, if that evil god was reborn as an Earthborn, just think how hard it will be for us to deal with him. In fact, that blood demon ancestor is not far from resurrecting that evil god, since he already started to hear the voice of that god's soul. At this point, Fourth stopped. She already finished her food. Oh, look at the time. I'll go now. See ya. Fourth did not even stand up from her seat and vanished. She was definitely a carefree one. However, she did not notice that Mark was frowning deeply. Gurgur. May could not help but worry as she held Mark's hand. Fourth seemed to have no idea, as she was confident that they had wiped out the blood demons at that time. However, Mark was here right now, a pure-blooded blood demon. More than that, the last words that Fourth said in that story, it was a definite clue about one thing that baffled Mark for quite a while now. A voice from that evil god's soul, huh? Mark said with a sigh. The pieces of the puzzle were now coming in together, forming the hidden picture. Mark could not help but slump on his chair. Papa, are you okay? Miracle asked, reaching for Mark's cheek. Mark turned at the little girl and smiled. I'm okay. If that evil god comes for Papa, I will kill it. Abigail chimed in. As usual, she was calm. However, her words were as brutal as ever. Ha ha. Mark could not help but laugh. I'll leave it to Gail then. Mark could not help but caress the heads of Abigail and Miracle. These two were surely lovable girls. On the other hand, Iola kept silent, staring at Mark at the side. Having memories of Keeper, she had a more mature mind. She could tell that something was wrong. It did not take long and lunch came. Mark and May, that had just eaten a late breakfast, still ate a bit to accompany the girls. After that, Mark and May started preparing for their departure for the next day. They still had to go to the spirit dimension to end their unfinished work there. Still, the atmosphere was quite cold. Gurgur, you're fine, right? May asked. Mark paused and looked at May. He wanted to ensure her that it was fine, but could not make himself lie to her. Not exactly. Mark shook his head. But don't worry, it will be fine. I will make sure that it will be fine. But then, May asked a question that made Mark freeze. Gurgur, you can already hear the voice that Fourth spoke about, right? That question made him look bitter. Is it obvious in my face? No. May shook her head. Gurgur did well keeping your expression the same, but I can feel that you were shaken when Fourth said that part. It was a matter of feeling. May, who was very sensitive towards things about Mark, could recognize his uneasiness. Mark caressed May's head. Don't worry. I don't plan to become an incarnation of some other person. I will find a way to deal it We are going back to the spirit dimension tomorrow. Let's see if we can meet Bathala and ask him. That suggestion made May nod. Nonetheless, there was nothing they could do in this situation. What Forth told them seemed to be true, and Mark experienced it firsthand. In that case, there was only one thing to do, and it was to find ways to prevent it. Unknown to Mark and May, Forth that ran her mouth without breaks was being called once more. This time, however, not for punishment. Day 138 AA. Inside the unknown space that was overseeing the world, a robed woman whose face could not be seen was standing still. She was staring at the empty space in front of her while 5 figures kneeled behind her. And if Mark was here, he would immediately recognize 4 of them. A little girl who always looked for amusement. The embodiment of amusement, Forth. A boy with an almost non-existent body. The embodiment of boredom, 9th. A beautiful woman with white hair and a strict demeanor. The embodiment of aesthetic appreciation, 3rd. A woman with spider-like eyes and hair that seemed to ooze of poison. The embodiment of disgust, 12th. Right now, they were together with an unfamiliar person. It was a girl that seemed to be in her late teens. Contrary to the others, who wore clothing related to their territory, she was wearing a rather scholarly attire. White long-sleeved uniform draped with a black robe, black skirt, and square glasses. She looked like a librarian at a glance. Furthermore, there was even several inches thick book on her arms. Rise. Do any of you know why I called all of you here? The robed figure, no other than the observer currently overseeing Earth, spoke. By the observer's command, the eyes stood up. 9th tilted his head, totally oblivious of the reason. The scholarly eye was also the same. On the other hand, the 3 that encountered each other this morning had a vague idea. Master, is it about that thing, I mean, man? 12th asked. Remembering what happened several hours earlier, 3rd could not help but frown. She never wanted to remember that at all ever. Not only she lost control and invaded someone's consciousness without proper reason, but she even suffered an awful consequence. Furthermore, there was no way for her to complain about it since she was the aggressor. Is it because I ran my mouth again? Forth also asked worriedly. At what Forth said, the observer seemed to have smiled a little. Forth, you don't have to worry. You definitely ran your mouth there, but none of what you said is strictly confidential. Hearing that, Forth could not help but sigh in relief. That was when the observer turned around to face the 5. But as 12th said, it had something to do with that man and the information you told him, Forth. There, Forth tilted her head. Master, what do you mean? Do you remember what information that man asked you about? About blood demons? Is there something wrong with it? Forth asked once more. Like usual, you're too slow in the uptake. 9th chimed in, picking his ear with his pinky. This behavior irked 3rd. 4th is slow, but you're as barbaric as ever. Huh? Says someone who vomited on someone else's table. How did you know about that? Hearing that 9th knew about what happened, she froze and turned her head towards 4th, like a broken doll. 4th smirked, taking out a small black bottle from her pocket. It instantly occurred to 3rd what the contents of that bottle were. No. Give me that. And there, the meeting was thrown off course. Silence. A heavy pressure enveloped the 3 that were causing trouble, forcing them to freeze on the spot. The voice came from the scholarly girl, now glaring at them coldly. You 3 are in the presence of Master. Behave yourselves. The scholarly girl strictly reprimanded, making the 3 troublemakers gulp. 19th, that's enough. The observer commanded. And you 3, don't make a ruckus here. Yes, Master. The scholarly girl, 19th, the embodiment of interest, replied respectfully, and stepped back. As for the troublesome trio, they could only look down in embarrassment. Finally, silence returned to the empty white space. Here, 12th spoke. Master, is there a chance that that man is a blood demon? Or else, why would he know about them or ask what happened? The observer nodded. There is no need to say about chances. That man is a blood demon. Not only him but his family and a few more humans and creatures in that base. Everyone froze at that declaration. 19th, show them. The observer turned to 19th and ordered. There. The scholarly eye opened her book and threw it in the air. The book then enlarged, displaying the contents of its pages for everyone to see. On the pages of the book, it was all the information they could gather about Mark. This is. Fourth started focused. After all, the pages of 19th's book contained information about her candidate. The information started with Mark's so-called status. It did not list any specific attributes like a numerical representation of his strength or agility. The page only listed his name, age, race, and, most importantly, abilities. There were even the titles, the names given to Mark by the people that met him for the entirety of his life. But to say, all of them, even the observer, was disgruntled. All other information could be read properly, but Mark's race was a set of a garbled mess that no one could understand. This made it hard to determine that he was a blood demon. However, one of his titles said it all. Master of the Night-Evered Spirit Tree. Fourth murmured before raising her voice in exclamation. That red-colored spirit tree. Fourth was totally shocked. There were quite a number of red-leafed spirit trees in history and did not put it to mind. Furthermore, although she knew about this spirit tree that the ancestor of blood demons raised, she never saw it. Who would have thought that the red-leafed spirit tree she had seen many times already had actually been a night-evered spirit tree? So, my suspicions are kinda right, huh? Ninth spoke, making everyone turn to him to explain. Back then, when I met him and his wife and tested him, I saw a characteristic on two of them that is only seen in blood demons in the past. When they use their racial abilities, their veins glow red, increasing their strength and speed. I'm not that suspicious though, since after this outbreak started, unique abilities had been popping out here and there from the Earthborns. Ninth's reason made them agree. Humans that were affected by the infected had been displaying abilities that no human was capable of in the past. It was understandable why he overlooked it. In any case, Mark, despite his race being unknown, was confirmed to be a blood demon. This pushed to a question. Master, are we going to eliminate them? Third asked. She was totally eager to erase the cause of the humiliation she experienced. That question made Fourth silent. She was rather amused with Mark, and she took quite a liking for his behavior. Furthermore, she was her only capable candidate in her territory. On the other hand, Ninth was chill. He did not care much about everything and would only follow orders. 12th also did not have many opinions. She would only do what she needed to do. Unexpectedly, 19th spoke. If we are going to eliminate him, there was no need for this meeting at all. The four realized. If they were going to eliminate Mark and the other people and creatures that were proven to be blood demons, there was no need for this meeting, and the observer would only call for the ones in charge of eliminating possible threats, 10th and 18th. Here was when the observer spoke her goal in this meeting. I called you all here to ask what you think of that man. It is you four that met him personally. That made the four surprised. They could not fathom why there was the need for this, considering that Mark could turn into the next incarnation of that evil god. Here, 19th stepped forward to explain. All of you are confused about why the master had no plans to kill them. Then, just look at this. 19th pointed at a line among Mark's abilities. I'm sure that Third experienced it firsthand. Reading what 19th pointed at, she turned red. She was about to explode in anger. Imaginary world. An ability to manipulate the sea of consciousness into one's own world. Mark had displayed it before when Third invaded his consciousness and caused her to undergo such humiliation. But then, while Third was already fuming, 19th pointed at something that made her pale instead. Before you explode, you might want to know how lucky you are. Soul gluttony. The ability to absorb the soul or consciousness that invaded the user's consciousness. He let you go on purpose and did not try to absorb you. You basically tried to feed yourself to him. Don't you think that your anger is unreasonable now? But then, 12th's eyes glowed. That ability. 12th then turned to her master. There, the observer smiled and nodded. That is the reason we are not in a hurry to eliminate him. There's a good possibility that we can use him to destroy the root of that evil god's soul. In this way, they would be able to rid of that evil god for good. Of course, it was still a gamble. After all, there was a chance that Mark would fail to absorb the soul of that evil god and get his soul absorbed instead. However, if Mark was to succeed, it would end the threat that that evil god posed to Earth. And now, we must evaluate him, the observer said. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. The evaluation of Mark did not take long, with only third saying negative things about him. Ninth actually have a positive view of Mark considering how he saw his reaction after May was harmed. However, the way that Mark took revenge gave some minus points as he was basically an incarnation of the devil at that time. 12th did not have much to say, considering that she barely had enough interaction with Mark. However, how Mark did not fear them at all made her believe that Mark would not succumb to that evil god out of fear. Lastly, there was no need to tell what 4th's view about Mark. She definitely enjoyed his company as he did not treat her like some sort of respectable apostle and treated her like a brat. She found it amusing and soothing as if she gained a friend to annoy and talk to. It was hard to do that towards other people since they would fear her to the extent of worshipping her after knowing what she was. Now, the observer gave the orders. 4th, I will task you to supporting them with information as needed. We can't let him die now that we can use him to kill one of the threats we are facing. 9th, 12th. You two go back to your territories. If that man entered your territories, welcome him properly. I will order the other eyes to do the same. 3rd, you also return and I order you not to trouble him. This is a strict order. If you did not want to turn into a child like 4th, 9th, and 16th, do not fail this order. Everyone kneeled after receiving their orders and vanished. 3rd was a bit disgruntled about the order she was given, though. After the 4 left, the only ones left in the white space was the observer and 19th. Master, are we only focusing on this man called Mark? There are other blood demons around him? 19th asked, flipping her book that already turned back to its right size. So far, only that man is close to being a deity. All the others were still far from it, even his proclaimed wife. It is just we can't tell if he already heard the voice or not at this point. 19th agreed. Among the blood demons that were recorded in her book, only Mark was close to being a deity. However, the reason why they could not tell if he could hear the voice already was because 19th flipped on the pages and contained his life experiences. Even from his young life, there was a lot of weird occurrences. But the weirdest one was from 6 years ago. The last thing properly recorded in her book was when Mark saw an explosion in the sky. The next thing was barely distinguishable with garbled mess here and there. It went from bad to worse as the pages went further until the pages that showed the rest of Mark's life was painted black. The observer and 19th were not worried about this though. It was just the result of the string of fate, not being attached to him anymore. Day 138 to 2:26 p.m. Mountain Base, Mount Malabito, General Nakar, Quezon Province, Philippines. Mark wanted to know about the blood demons considering that no one knew a lot about them. Mythological and historical records, even legends and folklores, did not mention anything about them. It was like someone erased their existence on purpose. And now, it was very likely that it was the work of the observer and the eyes. Finally, Mark learned about the actual reason why blood demons got purged from existence. It also revealed a problem for him to mull about, though. And this problem was quite a serious one. In any case, there was no use mulling about it at this point. Mark was just glad that he became informed about it before things became serious. That was why instead of focusing on a problem that he could do nothing at the moment, he turned his attention to the preparations and checking things in the base before they leave for tomorrow. First was the removal of the black dust around the base. And to say, the armor that Mark made was not exactly convenient for everyone's use. The armors were made thin and did not weigh too much at all. Its only purpose was to avoid direct contact with the black dust and not to defend from attacks. Still, most of the workers were not used to wearing armor while working. After all, in any kind of work, it was better to wear comfortable clothing. However, it could not be helped at all. Everyone needed to avoid the effects of the black dust as much as possible. Next was the people that would go back to the spirit dimension. Unlike before, several people would need to stay back. It would be Spera, Ephelia, Alana, and Colleen. Spera and Ephelia both had the same reason for staying behind. Both of them were necessary for the preparations they were doing before the second wave came. Spera was needed to open the portals to transport the supplies they collected while the infected that were under Ephelia's control did the transportation. On the other hand, Alana and Colleen had new duties now, and it was to help with scouting and clearing the infected at places where they found supplies. Their help was more needed there than on Mark's side. In the first place, the reason Mark brought Colleen with him all the time was to keep Carla in check. Now that Carla and Colleen were already separated, only Carla needed to come with Mark's group. One of the individuals needed in the base was Amihan. However, there was no way for her to stay behind while Mark went somewhere else. She would definitely throw a tantrum. It was only because the situation could not be helped that she behaved while Mark was in New Jersey. In other situations, she would rather run with Mark into danger than staying with other people that she barely interacted with. Mark had no problems with her coming along, however. Since the problem with the black dust changed from removing it to storing it, the work became easier. Mark also went back to the pagoda to see their work. Gathering supplies were slow in his view, but in the least, it was going smoothly. He also went near the outpost of Ouroboros to check. Strangely, though, the number of personnel they had there became lesser. Even the presence of shadow people sent by them was almost non-existent. At most, 2 or 3 shadow people were lurking around. They had no intention to infiltrate, though, and only watched their activities from a distance. It was really strange as to why Ouroboros moved like this. However, it was to Mark's favor as he had to leave for some time. Well, inside the spirit dimension, time would be shorter, but it was still faster here on Earth comparing the two. There was one problem that cropped up, though. The pagoda was close, very close to Reading City. Although the geography around the pagoda was a natural defense itself, more and more infected were trying to climb up the geographical barriers to reach their outpost. Because of this, it would not be too long, and they would be forced to cease the activities here and focus somewhere else. Right now, Mark was standing above the slope, watching the infected lost inside the Tikbalang's illusion. There's a lot of them, isn't there? Mark asked Huey, who stood beside him. Yes, boss. Huey agreed. Actually, there's more of them last night. A horde wandered tried to climb up the slope directly from the city center. This is only a fourth of that horde that managed to reach the illusion. Most of them went the other way after failing to climb up. Mark nodded after hearing that. In fact, all of the infected in front of them were mutated ones. It was not strange as common biters and eaters did not have too much capability and intelligence to climb up steep slopes. It was even normal to see any of them tumbling down a set of not that steep stairs. We better eliminate these ones first, Mark said, leading everyone to kill the infected trapped in the illusion. It did not take too long to kill the infected inside the illusion. The Tikbalangs might not be able to choose which ones they wanted their illusion to affect, but in the least, they could isolate the ones inside at will. Wiu. This became easier because of Boss here, Huey said as he shot the last infected with a crossbow through its head. If it's just us, it would take longer. Those words made everyone agree. Mark's existence not only raised their morale in facing the terrifying infected, but because of him being present, they could go wild a bit as their safety was more secured. If I'm not around, do things carefully, Mark warned. Don't worry, Master, Jolene spoke. None of us here wants to die. That was right. No one. Not only them but a lot of people wanted to die in this wrecked up world. It was even more for people that were now under Mark that found their safe haven. Mark shrugged. At least, the people he took under him were finding their new lives better. Unlike them, the ones that Mark saw before were the ones truly suffering. With those thoughts, Mark turned his head towards the direction of Reading City. The buildup of infected at the edge of the city could be seen clearly. If the number of infected going up the mountain became uncontrollable, do not hesitate to abandon this place. This is an order. This place is not a part of our base but a temporary outpost. Temporary. It's not a big loss to us if this place is gone. Saying those, Mark turned to everyone. There, they all nodded in affirmation. He had to give this order in case these guys behave like some heroic idiots that did not want to lose against the infected and stay to protect this place. Nevertheless, the chance of that happening was really small. He just went and said it to be secure. After he finished checking on the situation at the pagoda, Mark returned to the base with Spera. Only to find Forth relaxing inside his house, again. Why the hell are you here again? Mark could not help but ask. Anyone would surely ask this after seeing someone not welcomed going back and forth into your house without permission. What? It's not like I'm causing trouble, right? I even hid my presence and did not show myself to anyone outside your house. Forth argued. Surely, for some reason, Forth was more considerate compared to her actions this morning. The pressure that the eyes naturally emit was contained properly either. If she showed herself to anyone in his base, they would be in panic considering that a lot of them knew about her but the base was just like the usual. However, that's not the answer to my question. Mark grumbled. He would rather have the eyes stay away from him, considering that he was a blood demon that the eyes should be eliminating. Didn't I tell you before that I'm spending my time here to relax since there was really no other places to go to? Forth reasoned properly. But then, she dropped a question that made Mark frown. What are you worried about? The fact that you're a blood demon and your family is the same. Mark frowned but did not react too much. After all, it was already given that it would be revealed after how he asked questions this morning. Although showed it like he was just interested, there was still a chance for it to be revealed. Nevertheless, Mark found it odd. Forth already knew, but she was not making any move and confronted him about it. Actually, I have another errand. Forth said as a glowing crystal ball, about the size of a baseball, appeared on her hand. Our master already knows that you're a blood demon. But because of special circumstances on you, we are not going to make any move or plan on eliminating you or the remaining blood demons in your base. My master sent this just before I returned here. And there, Forth flicked her hand, and the crystal magically floated towards Mark. Mark did not hesitate to catch the crystal as he could not detect any ill intent from Forth. The moment he touched the crystal, however, he froze. The crystal exploded with bright light, and a rather soothing voice entered Mark's ears. It explained everything that was happening and why he would not be subjected to elimination. At least, not now. Hearing everything he needed to know from the plan of the eyes and the observer, Mark's mind returned to reality. So, you guys want to make me as a tool, isn't it? Mark asked. He was quite dissatisfied with the arrangement. Unexpectedly, Forth showed a complicated expression. I know, right? Being treated like a tool is not something that everyone can accept. At least, you and your family won't be subjected to complete annihilation, right? You have no choice to accept it. That was right. Mark had no choice but to accept it. Then, a question entered his mind. Let me ask something. What is it? What will happen to the others if I died before the plans of your master started? Mark could not help but ask. It was the worst case scenario, but it was better to have knowledge about it. There, Forth froze after receiving the question. Though rather than actually freezing, it was more like she was receiving a reply from somewhere. And when she came to, she immediately replied in a pitiful manner. We will have no choice but kill the remaining blood demons if you died. After all, only you have the ability to consume souls among the blood demons, right? Then, the others will be prone to become the avatar of that evil god instead. That can't happen, right? So you better take care of yourself. That pushed Mark into contemplation. It was one more thing to worry about. Without being able to do anything about it, Mark could only sigh. Don't worry. I know you will be fine. I believe in you. Fourth said assuringly, which made Mark quite confused as to how this girl got that confidence on him. Well, in the least, Mark knew that the observer and the eyes would not meddle in his business in a negative way. While in those thoughts, Mark then remembered the last thing he needed to do. It was to check on Amy and the stone egg she had. It was still postponed because of the things he needed to do. That was when a thought entered his mind and his eyes fell on Fourth. Why are you looking at me like that? Fourth was confused. Actually, I had a question. But I have to show you someone first. Mark replied. That's possible, right? There's no problem, I guess. Fourth agreed and Mark led her to the place where Amy was staying. But then, when they entered and Fourth saw Amy, she froze in total shock.